Well, hi there! This is a burying beetle. They have a special place in my heart because my entire master's thesis was about their crazy breeding habits, which aren't even the craziest ones that we're going to discuss today, but they are seriously weird and amazing. So these little beetles fly around at night, smelling around for something dead. If they find something large, they get a meal. But if they find something small, like a mouse or a small bird, well, that's when things really get interesting. For starters, these beetles are little bears. I did research in the field with these beetles, and wherever they had found a carcass, there would be body parts of other carrion beetles strewn about all over where they had been shredded by burying beetles. But when they find a carcass, they often aren't the only ones to find it, and a battle begins. The burying beetles tend to be the winners of the battle, but not just the burying beetles, but more specifically, the largest male and the largest female. And the two of them, after shredding or running off the competition, bury the carcass, hence the name. And once it's buried, they strip it of hair or feathers, roll it into a ball, and cover it with secretions that prevent it from decaying. All the while, they will be mating, and the female will be laying eggs. And they will be assessing the size of the carcass. And why do they need to know the size of the carcass? Because they have a life or death calculation to make. Pretty soon, the eggs that the female has been laying are going to hatch, and that carcass will be the only source of sustenance for both parents and their offspring until the offspring are large enough to pupate and become adult beetles. If they attempt to raise too many larvae, they'll run out of carcass early, meaning that they will go hungry and their brood may die, or pupate at a very small size and become, well, the type of beetles that don't win many carcasses. If they raise too few larvae, they'll have wasted an opportunity to pass on their genes. So these beetles have been selected upon to make good calculations. While the male or the female can raise the brood alone, they generally show biparental care, where both parents help raise the offspring together. And this is good redundancy, because the offspring, at least at first, cannot even feed themselves. They have to be fed by their parents like baby birds. Altricial baby birds, to be precise. But once they make this calculation, how do they control how many babies they raise? Well, they could just lay the right number of eggs. But, what if some don't hatch? Well, they lay extra eggs. And then when the babies come onto the carcass, they simply eat the ones they can't afford to feed. Like any good parent. It's called filial cannibalism, if you want a term that is difficult to integrate into polite conversation. And don't worry, this won't be the last awkward conversation that we'll have today. And while we're on this subject, shall we talk about the problem with incest? And there is actually only one problem with incest: homozygosity. Contrary to popular belief, incest doesn't cause mutations to occur. Your gametes don't know that they're going to be combined with those of a close relative. But we all have some alleles, which are like versions of a gene, in our genomes that, well, if we had two of them, would cause some real problems. The good news is that for most of the genes that we have, we get one copy from mom and one copy from dad. And while we likely get some nasty recessive alleles from each parent, the likelihood that we get the same nasty recessive alleles from both parents is very low. Well, unless your parents are closely related, especially if this kind of thing has been common for a while in your family. Now let's talk about islands. Islands tend to be pretty low in species biodiversity. Now there are many reasons for this, but one of them is that, well, it's hard to get to islands for most non-flying land animals. In many cases, if a freak incident leads to some land animal washing up on shore of some island, it lives out its life and dies alone on that island. Unless lightning strikes twice and, just by dumb luck, a mate washes up during the lifetime of the original castaway. It's not impossible, but probably pretty unlikely. Who knows just how many land animals have lived out their final days all alone and childless on an island somewhere. One key exception would be if that animal that washes up on shore is gravid or pregnant when it happens. And then, of course, expect to see a lot of inbreeding going on in the near future. That is, if any breeding happens at all. And that has likely been the source of many island colonizations. But there is another phenomenon that you seem to see more often in island populations than mainland populations. And I suspect that there is a good reason for it. But that phenomenon is that of virgin birth, called parthenogenesis, where a female that has never been exposed to a male has babies. And there are several ways that this can happen. For example, in mourning geckos, island populations of mourning geckos generally reproduce entirely by parthenogenesis, specifically by cloning. And these island populations are entirely female. My superdwarf articulated python Athena is a half clone, as in her mother didn't produce an offspring with all of her chromosomes, but only passed on half of her chromosomes, just like she would if she was going to reproduce sexually. The only difference is that her egg, it didn't get fertilized by sperm, so no sperm contributed the other half of the genome. But rather, the half set of chromosomes that were present in the egg duplicated, and thus the second set of chromosomes is identical to the first. She is homozygous for everything. She is as inbred as it's possible to be. And she could just drop dead at any moment. But if she makes it, then there would be no nasty recessive alleles in the half genome that she got twice from her mother. Now, because pythons have XY sex determination, where females are XX and males are XY, a female can only give an X chromosome to her offspring, which means that all parthenogenic offspring are XX females. But if a female python that can do parthenogenesis happens to wash up on an island, instead of living out her life and dying alone and childless, she can produce all sorts of female offspring. And it's not unlikely that many of her offspring will be able to do the same. And when a male washes up, decades or centuries later, instead of arriving on a pythonless island where a lone female once lived, he arrives in the land of the Amazons, and a population is born. But what I really want to talk about right now are Komodo dragons. Because Komodo dragons, another island species, are capable of producing half clones. But importantly, Komodo dragons do not have XY sex determination, but are ZW, like most lizards and birds. ZW sex determination is like XY, except it is the female that has two different chromosomes. Which means that when they reproduce via parthenogenesis, via half cloning, instead of producing all female offspring, they can produce ZZ males, or WW dead. They're just as dead as you would be if you were YY. Which means that at least half of their eggs won't even hatch. And those that do hatch will all be males. Being homozygous for everything, many of them will no doubt die before adulthood as well. But those that make it to adulthood have no alleles that are catastrophic to have two of. In other words, if you're going to make your own inbred mate, it wouldn't be possible to make a better one than that. And just like that, you've weeded out many of the nasty recessive alleles and started a new population. And as crazy as that is, that's not at all the craziest form of parthenogenesis that we're going to discuss. But now that we've discussed populations of lizards with no males, and some that make their own males, I want to talk about one species with 3 different kinds of males. Side-blotched lizards. And you can tell these 3 kinds of males apart by the color of their throats. There are orange-throated males, blue-throated males, and yellow-throated males. And that wouldn't matter much if it weren't for the fact that the color of the throat is indicative of the way that they behave. Orange males have the highest levels of testosterone of any of the 3. They are the most aggressive and the best fighters. They defend large territories and large groups of females that reside therein. Orange males could also be called fighters. Blue males defend smaller territories and smaller numbers of females. They tend to lose fights with orange males for territory or access to females, but they stay much closer to their females and keep a careful eye on them. Blue males could also be called snugglers. Yellow males do not defend territories or females at all. They lose fights to both orange and blue males. And thus it might seem that their genes probably disappear over time. Probably the blue males as well. And like most sexually reproducing species, they should only have one major type of male. Because for 3 morphotypes to persist, all 3 would need to be successful. And successful at the one thing that matters most in the world of evolution, passing on your genes. So all 3 would need to be successful, and successful at somewhat similar levels. So how does this happen? Well, orange males pretty much always win in a fight, which makes it really difficult for a blue male to have a territory near an orange male. Thus, blue males will not be able to mate with females near an orange male. But orange males are very busy, running all over their large territories, chasing off blue males and any others that they happen to notice coming anywhere near the borders of their expansive little kingdoms. And while that cat is away, well, who's going to notice if a yellow-throated male that looks at a glance a lot like a female comes over to play? That little sneaker. So while the orange male would win in a fight with a yellow male, he doesn't beat what he's too busy to notice. But you know who isn't too busy to notice? Blue males. Blue males aren't running all over town. They're snuggled up close to their ladies in their manageable little territories. Sneakers may look a lot like females, at least at a glance, but if you watch one walk up to one of your ladies and attempt to mate with her, you'll figure it out. So snugglers beat sneakers, but lose to fighters. Sneakers beat fighters, but lose to snugglers. And fighters beat snugglers, but lose to sneakers. And if one type of male becomes disproportionately common, that just makes room for the one that beats him to be very successful until the numbers equal out again. It's rock, paper, scissors, except with lizards and no Spock.
Rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock!
While we're on the subject of fighting males, let's talk about why males are sometimes large and why that isn't always, or even generally, the case. Males tend to be large when they need to fight for access to females. Now stop and think of as many examples of animals as you can where the male is generally larger than the female. And ask yourself, do they fight? I'm sure you won't have any trouble verifying this reality. If this isn't the case, it actually makes far more sense for females to be larger than males. Because there is a cost to getting large. And that is mostly that it takes a long time. That is a lot of time where you could die before you get large enough to start breeding. And you don't have to be very big to make a whole mess of sperm. They're tiny. In fact, their tininess is the fundamental difference between males and females. Males make tiny gametes, and females make comparatively enormous gametes. So while a tiny male can make plenty of sperm, a larger female can produce either more or larger offspring. Both are beneficial when it comes to passing on your genes. So unless males fight for access to females, it makes sense for males to mature and start mating at a younger age and smaller size than females. And a good example of this that many people find crazy are spiders, like black widows. You now probably understand why females are so much larger than males, but that isn't the part of their mating practice that has been bothering you, is it? It's the part about getting eaten. Especially in the case of the Australian red-backed spider, where males have been observed thrusting themselves into the chelicerae of the female after mating. I mean, at least our black widows try to get away. So why would a spider choose to mate if it puts him in danger? And worse yet, why would a male spider deliberately sacrifice himself after mating? What the heck is going on? Well, the first thing to realize is that he might not know how much danger he's in, or that throwing himself into the waiting chelicerae of his mate will lead to his inevitable death. And many a male black widow has potentially avoided every opportunity to mate and has instead favored the comparatively long life of a bachelor. It's just that the genes that code for bachelor behavior, they don't get passed on much. So the next generation is full of the sons of those fellas that didn't let the name widow discourage them. And that probably explains why they attempt to mate. But why not even attempt to survive? Well, that comes down to the likelihood of having another chance to mate. If the chances of mating again are good, then selection will favor males that try for another opportunity. But if the chances are very low, like if females are few and far between, then selection might favor males that make sure that the mother of their children get at least one good meal over those that flee and die in the corner with the bachelors. Of course, it might be nice to just bring her a meal, a nuptial gift, if you will, like a robber fly, but one cannot always know when a chance to mate is about to come his way. If you find one of these rare females, the last thing you might want to do is spin a web and try to catch something before you head over and try to pass on your genes. Better to act fast and be the meal. And again, it is unlikely that he's thinking any of this out, but he is just doing what has worked well in the past, repeating the final acts of his father and his father's father and his father before him, and not the acts of great-great-uncle Daryl, who lived to the ripe old age of 6 months and had 3 jet skis and the sweetest bachelor pad, but who kept his genes to himself. So that explains why animals will choose to mate even when the cost of mating is, well, death. But what about insects that never reproduce at all? What about ants? Ants are eusocial. This means that, well, only some of them reproduce. Meanwhile, the rest assist, but do not reproduce at all. And one would think that if natural selection is correct, such a behavior would not exist. For goodness sake, this means that almost every ant that ever lives ends up childless like great-great-uncle Daryl, but without the jet skis and the bachelor pad, because they worked themselves to death building a castle for Queen Stella and her 5 million kids, as well as taking care of her and those kids, feeding them and even defending them with their lives. And this would make no sense at all if it weren't for the fact that Queen Stella is their mother. And those 5 million kids are, well, them and their siblings. Because having your own kids is actually only one way to pass your genes on to the next generation. Your genes also move on when your relatives reproduce. And you are, on average, just as related to your siblings as you are to your own children. Both inherit, on average, half of your genes. So it's a bit of a wash. Of course, it is fairly uncommon to forego having your own children so that you can work yourself to death helping your parents have more children. If for no other reason than just that from the moment of your birth, the number of children that you could potentially have in the future was higher than the number that your mother was likely to have in the future. You know, because she's older and some of her reproductive potential was already in the past. But this works for ants because there is something about ants that is very different. And that is that male ants are haploid. You, as well as female ants, are diploid. This means that for every type of chromosome that you have 2. One from mom and one from dad. Unless you're a parthenogenic baby, in which case you either got both from mom or you got one from mom and then just copied it. But that is what it is to be diploid. If you were haploid, like a male ant, you would get one from mom and that's where the story would end. You're haploid. And this matters because, just like you, female ants pass on half of their chromosomes to each of their offspring. But males, because they only have one set of chromosomes, always pass on all of them to their offspring. The non-reproductive ants in the colony are all diploid. They're all females. But all of them share that half of their chromosomes, the half that they got from their dad, with one another. Because the male can only make one kind of sperm. They share, on average, 50% of the chromosomes that they got from mom, the queen. So for one half, the half they got from mom, they share half of that half, 25%. For the other half, the half they got from dad, they share all of that half, 50%. And on average, this means that they share 75% of their genes with their sisters, including future queens. Whereas they would only share 50% of their genes with their own offspring, if they had them. So when it comes to passing on their genes, thanks to this phenomenon called haplodiploidy, where the males are haploid, female ants pass on more of their genes by helping mom produce more sisters than they would if they had their own offspring. Oh, and this is a really cool little fact, but when we study ants, we study the entire colony as though it was a single individual. And if you think about it, you, as an individual, are not that different from an ant colony. You too are composed of, in your case, trillions of individual living things called cells, not all of which reproduce, and that all work together to help those few reproductive cells fulfill that mission. So you're probably getting a bit of a window into why I love ants so much. I should tell you, nearly every video we make has a whole extra video just for our stinkin' rad fans at Patreon. And if you're interested in seeing those videos, especially the one for this video, because I can tell you it's going to be a doozy, you might want to just hop on over to Patreon and check that out. It also helps us make content like this, so it supports us, and trust me, you get a lot for it. This is a ceratiid anglerfish, also called a sea devil. But I think they're more reasonably called she-devils, though they do live in the sea, and they aren't devils. But the thing is that this is a female, and for a very long time, all of them that we ever identified were females. Now by this point, you can probably think of a number of ways that we could have an all-female population of anglerfish. But that isn't what's going on here. There are males. We just didn't know that they were even fish. So here's the thing about she-devils. They live in the extremely deep ocean. And in the extremely deep, dark ocean where light does not penetrate, there's not much life. Encounters with other living things are rare, which is why these fish are basically a mouth and stomach with a few fins on the side. If you happen to find something, you better be able to eat it, because it doesn't happen very often. And if you think that finding food is hard to do, there is one thing that is much less likely to occur. So most ray-finned fishes, like anglerfish, have external fertilization. This means that females lay unfertilized eggs, and then a male fertilizes the eggs outside of her body. Which means that the male and the female need to both be at the site where the eggs are laid when they're laid. They can't just mate when it's convenient and then lay the eggs later. So what are the odds that at just the moment that the female is ready to lay eggs and has found the right place to lay them, then a male of the right species will also be there to fertilize them in the vast, dark, near emptiness of the deep ocean? Well, that depends. So I said that all of them that we identified were females, though most of these females had some sort of parasites on them. Now, a parasite is an organism that derives benefit from another organism, a host, to the detriment of the host, but without immediately killing the host, as would a predator. Well, it turns out that the parasites weren't parasites at all, but fellas. The odds of having a male with you at the time and place that you want to lay your eggs in the vast, dark, near emptiness of the deep ocean are very low, unless you bring him with you everywhere you go. I guess then the only problem would be feeding your testicle-toting tag-along. I mean, it's hard enough to feed yourself, and you just swallow whole whatever you find. So how are you going to get nutrients from your stomach to your sperm-spewing soulmate? Well, the second question is easier to answer than the first. Ray-finned fishes generally don't have a lot of body parts that they can use to hold on to things. Really, just their mouths. So he bites onto the female. That solves one problem, but honestly makes that first problem even worse. But they solve it by simply fusing together to the point that their circulatory systems merge. Most of his nervous system and other organs dissolve away, and he becomes a set of testicles at her disposal, whenever she needs some sperm. And she just delivers the nutrients those testicles need with her blood, just like she does with her own gonads. Everyone's a winner! The truth is that in many species, until a male attaches himself to the female, neither the testicles of the male nor the ovaries of the female fully mature. There's no sense in having one without the other. But once the two merge into a heterosexual chimera of convenience, then it's worth having some functional gonads. So our two problems are solved, and a whole new one created. You can't just merge two genetically different animals together and assume that everything's gonna be fine.
I made a pigeon rat.
Your immune system pretty much exists to stop organisms that aren't you from living on or in you. So your immune system is going to attack that little chomper, who may be only 1/500,000th your size. No worries though, ceratiid anglerfish simply have a completely different type of immune system, so this isn't an issue. I need to make a whole video just about anglerfish here soon. And we definitely need to do this again, because I'm just getting warmed up talking about weird mating strategies. So let me know if you want to see a sequel sooner than later. If you're into that kind of thing. Which is a weird kind of thing to admit being into. But here we are. What was the weirdest one we discussed today? And what crazy mating strategies do you want to see in the next one? As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon. And while we're on this subject, shall we talk about the problem with incest?
Good.
No, Spock? What do you mean?
Rock, paper, scissors, delicious Spock. Big Bang Theory.
And she just delivers the nutrients those testicles need with her blood, just like she does with her own gonads. Everyone's a winner!
Not everyone.
Who loses?
The poor male.
Worse than the redback spider?
I guess not. So, Clint, are you a fighter, a snuggler, or a sneaker?
I'm a snuggler.
Yeah. Clint,
Yo.
can you give our patrons maybe a sneak peek of potential other mating strategies?
I have so many good ones.
Let's change our whole channel to this.
Yeah! Clint's sex stories.
Sex stories.